So about 5 weeks ago, we reviewed a Gene Hackman movie called The Poseidon Adventure. And after my stepdad Dylan saw that review, he decided to use his channel points to request another Gene Hackman movie called Unforgiven. So Unforgiven is a 1992 Western film that was produced by, directed by, and starred in by Clint Eastwood. Eastwood had actually written this film as far back as 1976, but he held off on it because he wanted to make sure he was old enough to play the part, and he wanted it to be his last Western. And it seems he got exactly what he wanted, and he stuck to his word, as this was indeed his last Western film. And I think many people would agree that it's also his best Western film. In addition to Eastwood and Hackman, this film also featured names such as Morgan Freeman, Richard Harris, James Wolvert, Saul Rubniak, Francis Fisher, and Anna Thompson. And on a budget of $14.5 million, this film drew big, and it grossed about $159 million at the box office. It also became just the third Western to win the Oscar for Best Picture, following Cimarron in 1931 and Dances with Wolves in 1990. And since this film, only one other Western has won Best Picture, that being No Country for Old Men in 2007. So what is this awesome film about? Well, it's about an old gunslinger named Will Money who 10 years after retiring from being a killer, gets pulled back into his old ways. After a town sheriff named Little Bill fails to properly punish two men that cut up the face of a prostitute, Will, his old friend Ned, and their new friend the Schofield Kid go out to properly deliver justice. But can Will actually regain his old glory, and will they be able to actually bring all these men down? Well, we're gonna find out right now as we review Unforgiven, 1992. So our film begins in the year 1880 in the town of Big Whiskey, Wyoming. Two cowboys by the name of Quick Mike and Davy Bunting assault and cut up the face of a prostitute after she laughed at Quick Mike's small penis. And it's kind of funny when you think about it, but yes, the upcoming events of this movie are all set forth by the fact that Quick Mike has a little dick. So the town sheriff, Little Bill Daggett, and his deputies show up to deliver punishment to the cowboys. The prostitute's employer, Skinny Dubois, mentions to the sheriff that he has a contract with her, and that now she can't properly fulfill her duties. The sheriff then decides that their punishment will be that they have to give 7 horses to Skinny in order to pay for her contract. The other prostitutes, especially the head prostitute Strawberry Alice, are outraged by this, but Little Bill doesn't really give a shit. The prostitutes then decide to put their money together to offer a reward to anyone who can kill the cowboys. So meanwhile in Kansas, widower William Money as well as his 2 kids are putting in work on their farm. Money has been confronted by a cocky young cowboy named the Schofield Kid, who tells him about a $1,000 reward in order to kill the 2 cowboys. Money tells the kid that he's been out of the outlaw life for 10 years, however, after he met his late wife, who stopped him from drinking and killing people. The Schofield Kid is disappointed but tells Money to catch up with him just in case he changes his mind. Back in Wyoming, Quick Mike and Davy show up to give the horses to Skinny, and the prostitutes are not exactly happy to see them. In order to try to make amends, Davy tries to offer Delilah, who was the girl who got her face cut up, a really nice pony. And yeah, the prostitutes don't really see that as proper comeuppance, and they chase him off. Back in Kansas once again, Will has decided that in order for his kids to have a better future, he needs the money, and although he's a bit rusty, he decides to set off. Meanwhile, Skinny snitches to Little Bill about the reward the prostitutes have set out, and yeah, he's not too happy about it. While on the way, Will decides to meet up with his old outlaw friend named Ned, and after a little coercing, Ned decides to join him. Then there's this really cool scene where they're at the campfire and they're talking about old times, and I noticed during this that Will keeps repeating that, oh, that's not me anymore, that's not me anymore. He's still trying to convince himself that he's not going to go back to his old ways, which, you'll see in a second, is pretty good foreshadowing. Meanwhile, in the train of doom, a supposed legendary outlaw named English Bob is riding into town. He's accompanied by a man named W.W. Beauchamp who's writing a biography on English Bob. So the two arrive in Big Whiskey, but when one of the deputies tells English Bob that he can't have guns there due to town policy, Bob just basically tells him to fuck off. This causes the deputies as well as Sheriff Little Bill to surround them in the middle of town. Beauchamp quickly realizes that these men mean business, and he promptly pisses himself. And after Little Bill takes English Bob's guns, he then decides to beat the ever-living fuck out of him. Like, he just nearly murders this dude, and then sends a message to any other quote-unquote assassins that they better not come to try to take the reward. Speaking of would-be assassins, Will and Ned are riding along before somebody starts shooting at them. Turns out the person shooting at him was the Schofield Kid, who was spooked by them, I guess. The Schofield kid is initially not happy about Ned being there and also not very happy about splitting the profits 3 ways, but he decides to agree to it. Back in the Big Whiskey jail, meanwhile, Little Bill tells Beauchamp that basically English Bob is a fraud and everything he wrote in his book is pretty much not true. He lets him out of his cell and then tells him some more stories and then presents him with a proposition. Little Bill tells Beauchamp that if he's able to successfully shoot him, he can take the keys, take English Bob, and get out of there. Beauchamp then proposes giving English Bob the gun, but Bob backs off. Back to our main characters, and it's started to rain, but Will refuses to take a shot of whiskey as he doesn't want to break his promise to his wife about not drinking. The next day back in Big Whiskey, English Bob has set off while Beauchamp decides to stay in town and write about Little Bill instead. And as he's writing off, the final farce about English Bob is revealed, as turns out he's a little bit more cockney than we originally thought. So Ned, Will, and the Schofield kid finally arrive in Big Whiskey to meet the prostitutes about the reward. Ned and the Schofield kid go up to meet the prostitutes while Will, who's developed a fever, stays down in the saloon. And unfortunately, that's when Little Bill and the deputies show up to confront Will about his gun. Will lies about not having a gun before turning it over, and then Little Bill beats the piss out of him. While this is going on, turns out Ned and the Schofield kid were having some fun with the prostitutes, and they escape for the window. They're able to take Will back to their camp, but it appears the fever has set Will into some sort of state of shock, and it looks like he might not make it. He does end up recovering though after 3 days and meets Delilah for the first time. Delilah, because well, she's a prostitute, offers him sex, but he turns her down in order to stay faithful to his wife. With Will now fully recovered, him, Ned, and the Schofield kid ambush Davy as well as his friends in a ravine. Ned misses the initial shot though and hits Davy's horse instead, and then he freezes up. This forces Will to take the shots instead, and on his last bullet, he gets Davy for the gut, which ends up killing him. After this, Ned has decided he doesn't want to kill anymore and he decides to go home, while Will and the Schofield kid carry on. Ned's trip home doesn't really go very well though, as he's captured by Little Bill's men. Little Bill then proceeds to brutally torture and whip him in order to get information on the other two. All the meanwhile, Will and the Schofield kid ambush Quick Mike at his home, and the Schofield kid shoots him 3 times. And as they're waiting in a tree to get the reward, the Schofield kid tells Will that he was lying about all his exploits and that was actually the first man he ever killed. One of the prostitutes then shows up with the reward money and also tells them that Ned's dead, baby, which they were not aware of. The prostitute tells him that Ned was killed by Little Bill and displayed in town, and also in the end, he gave up who Will really was and all the terrible things he had done in the past, like killing women and children. And it's a really great scene because as she's divulging all this, we see Will start to drink as he slowly starts to morph back into his old self. So Will takes the kid's revolver since the kid doesn't want to kill anymore, and then he tells the kid to take his share of the money and give it to his family while he rides back into Big Whiskey. And in front of the Big Whiskey saloon, he sees a crude coffin with Ned's dead body in it with a sign that says, "This is what happens to assassins around here." And Will, who's now fully transformed back into his old self, arrives in the saloon with a shotgun in order to confront Little Bill. He starts by murdering Skinny simply for owning the saloon because, he displayed Ned's body out there, so fair enough. And then he goes to shoot Little Bill, but the gun misfires. Not to worry though, as he whips out his trusty pistol and mortally wounds Little Bill and kills about 7 men. He then loads up Ned's revolver and finishes off Little Bill by shooting him right in the face. And as he leaves town, he threatens the town people to give Ned a proper burial and also not to cut up any more prostitutes, or else he'll come back and kill the rest of them. The film ends with Will standing over his wife's grave along with some text that tells us that him and the children moved to San Francisco where they prospered in selling dry goods. So man, what an incredible fucking film. I gotta say, this is legitimately one of, if not the best Western I have ever seen. I mean, it had it all really. It was incredibly well acted, it had a great music score, it had a great plot, great drama, everything about this film was awesome. It's also kind of sad in a sense when you think about it, because Will really tried his best. He tried to stick to his new life, he tried to stick to who he had become, he tried to stick to not drinking, not killing, everything that he, promised his wife. But in the end, you are who you are, and you can't really change that. And it's completely up to interpretation what happens next with Will and his family, but personally I like to imagine that he was able to flip the switch back and have a good rest of his life with his kids. And to think, this was the last Clint Eastwood Western as well, and the first one we did. And you know what, man? We might just do more in the future, because Western films are awesome. I especially like films like this that are revisionist Westerns, that actually question what's going on and add some depth to the characters, other than just, blind killing. And don't get me wrong, good old-fashioned fun blind killing Westerns are fun too, but this has a lot more depth to it. So what's coming up next on the channel? Well, we're going to switch from one of the best westerns of all time to a disappointing sequel to one of the best horror movies of all time, as we take a look back next week at A Nightmare on Elm Street 2, Freddy's Revenge. In conclusion though, ladies and gentlemen, this is one of those films like The Godfather that in my opinion, I think you have to see it. It's probably one of the best films ever made. It's personally the best western I've ever seen, but I haven't seen all the westerns. I'm sure I'll see more in the future. But yeah, really, if you haven't seen this film, I would recommend checking it out. It is definitely worth your time. But that, ladies and gentlemen, is going to do it for me today. I hope you enjoyed my review of Unforgiven in 1992. Thank you guys for watching. If you want to follow any of my social media links, they're in the description down below. Thank you to all 64 of my patrons for supporting this video as well as both my channels. With all that being said though, my name is Noah Taff. This has been my review of Unforgiven 1992, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye.